They always laugh at first. It is a predictable constant across species, across generations, across wars. Strength recognizes weakness instantly, and weakness, when exposed, invites ridicule. I have observed this pattern for over 300 standard cycles as an instructor of the Galactic War Academy. And yet, I have also yearned that first impressions are often the most dangerous illusions. The transport vessel pierced the upper atmosphere in a blaze of controlled fire, its hull screaming against ionized resistance as it descended toward the Academy's obsidian landing platforms. Through the reinforced observation glass, I watched the newest batch of cadets arrive, warriors bred, engineered, or evolved for dominance. There were the Korthul, towering, plated giants whose exoskeletons could deflect ballistic fire. The Virex, lithe, multi-limbed predators with reflexes measured in microseconds. A collective of Sinari, linked minds moving as one, thinking faster than any individual organism could comprehend. Each one a weapon, each one worthy of the trials to come. And then there was the human. At first, I thought there had been an administrative error. He stood among them, smaller by a full head compared to the average recruit, his form lacking any natural armor, any visible augmentation, any evolutionary advantage that would justify his presence here. His skin soft, exposed, his frame thin, inefficient. Even his posture lacked the instinctive readiness I had come to expect from warriors. Statistically, his kind ranked below acceptable combat thresholds in nearly every measurable category. Fragile, slow, limited, irrelevant. A ripple of low-frequency amusement spread through the observation deck as other instructors noticed him. It did not take long for the cadets themselves to react. The Korthul were the first. One of them stepped forward as the recruit disembarked, its massive form casting a shadow that swallowed the human entirely. It emitted a guttural sound, translated through my auditory implant as laughter. "Is this a misplacement or entertainment?" it rumbled. The surrounding cadets joined in, their various forms of mockery filling the air, clicks, hisses, harmonic pulses. Even without translation, the meaning was universal. The human said nothing. He struggled briefly as he lifted his assigned equipment from the loading rack, a standard-issue survival pack calibrated for baseline species. I noted the strain immediately. His muscles tensed, his breathing shifted. Too heavy for him. More laughter. I recorded the observation automatically. Subject demonstrates below minimum physical capability. And yet, he did not ask for assistance. He adjusted his grip, shifted his posture, compensated, adapted. Curious. "Cadets," I announced, my voice amplified across the platform, silencing the noise instantly. "You stand at the threshold of the most advanced military institution in this quadrant. You were not selected for what you are. You were selected for what you may become." A lie, of course. Most of them were selected precisely because of what they already were. My gaze returned to the human. He was not looking at the others. He was looking at the environment, the landing platform, the defensive turrets, the positioning of instructors, the exits, cataloging, analyzing, learning. It was subtle, so subtle that none of the others noticed, but I did. We processed them through intake swiftly, genetic scans, neural baselines, combat aptitude projections. The results were as expected. The Korthul ranked highest in raw durability. The Virex dominated in speed and lethality. The Scenari exceeded all in coordination and tactical processing. The human? Below average in everything. Strength, speed, sensory range, reaction time. Even his psychological profile suggested instability, emotional variance beyond acceptable military parameters. A failure before he had even begun. And yet, there was an anomaly. His adaptability index. It fluctuated beyond standard modeling limits, too inconsistent to quantify, too unpredictable to categorize. The system flagged it as an error. I did not. Errors are rarely random. They are indicators. As the cycle dimmed and artificial night settled over the academy, the cadets dispersed to their assigned preparation zones. Most gathered in groups, alliances already forming, dominance hierarchies establishing themselves through subtle displays of power. The human remained alone. Of course he did. No species here saw value in him. I observed from a distance as he sat on the edge of the barracks platform, his equipment laid out before him. His movements were deliberate, inefficient by most standards, yet strangely precise. From his pack he retrieved a small primitive object, a blade. Not standard issue, unauthorized. Interesting. He began to sharpen it against a piece of alloy plating, the rhythmic motion steady, controlled. Sparks flickered in the dim light. His breathing slowed, stabilized, focused. Not preparing like the others, not relying on strength or speed or numbers, preparing differently. I felt it then. Not fear, not yet, but something unfamiliar. A deviation from expectation, and in my experience, deviations are where systems break or evolve. At dawn, the first trial would begin. Survival, an environment designed to eliminate the unworthy within hours. Most of these cadets would rely on what they were born with. The human? He would have nothing. I should have dismissed him then. Marked him for early elimination, forgotten him as so many before. Instead, I watched, because something in the way he moved, quiet, deliberate, unyielding, suggested a possibility I could not yet define. The announcement echoed across the academy. First evaluation begins at dawn. The others prepared with confidence, with arrogance, with certainty. The human continued sharpening his blade, saying nothing. And for reasons I could not explain, I began to wonder if he already understood something the rest of us did not.
The first to break are always the strongest. It is an irony I have witnessed too many times to ignore. Power breeds dependence, and dependence breeds failure. Dawn over the academy is not light, it is fire. The horizon ignited as the trial world stabilized into its active state, the artificial sun flaring with violent intensity. From orbit, the terrain appeared deceptively simple, an endless wasteland of fractured stone and metallic dunes. But I knew its truth. Shifting gravity fields, atmospheric toxicity, indigenous predators engineered to hunt by weakness. A perfect crucible. Survive, I announced across the deployment channel. Duration, 1 full cycle. Extraction is earned, not given. The cadets were dropped without ceremony. They hit the ground hard, some landing with practiced precision, others with brute force impact that cracked the surface beneath them. The Corthal barely staggered. The Virex dispersed instantly, vanishing into motion. The scenario aligned themselves in perfect formation, already calculating optimal survival paths. And the human. He fell. Not gracefully, not efficiently. His body collided with the jagged terrain, momentum uncontrolled. I heard the impact even through filtered audio, bone against stone. Several cadets laughed over the comms. "Already broken," one transmitted. I almost agreed. He remained still for 3.2 seconds. Then he moved. Slowly, deliberately. He pushed himself up, favoring one side, injury confirmed. His breathing spiked, erratic under the strain of the atmosphere. The environmental toxins were already taking effect. I could see the micro-tremors in his limbs. The gravity shifted. A localized spike, 2.3 times standard. Even the Corthal adjusted their stance. The human nearly collapsed again. His legs buckled, his frame unable to compensate. For a moment I expected him to remain down, to fail as all data predicted. Instead, he changed. He lowered his center of gravity, spread his weight, reduced his profile against the force pressing him into the ground. Primitive, inefficient, effective. He began to move, not forward, not yet, sideways, testing, measuring, learning. Around him, the others surged ahead. The Virex leapt across terrain with impossible speed, their bodies built for this chaos. The Corthal advanced in straight lines, their armor deflecting debris and resisting pressure. The Sonari split into coordinated units, mapping the environment in real time. They were winning. Of course they were. The human was not. Minutes stretched into cycles. The trial intensified. Storms rolled across the wasteland, clouds of corrosive particulate that stripped exposed surfaces and disrupted sensory input. Lightning arced horizontally, drawn by unstable magnetic fields. Cadets began to falter. A Virex miscalculated a leap. Gravity spiked mid-air. It struck the ground at lethal velocity. Eliminated. A Sonari cluster lost cohesion when one node was compromised. Their advantage became their weakness. They froze, unable to adapt independently. Eliminated. The Corthal pressed forward, unstoppable, until the terrain shifted beneath them. A sink of metallic sand swallowed one whole. Strength meant nothing when the ground itself betrayed you. And the human, he was still behind. Still slower, still weaker, but not failing. I magnified his feed. He had found shelter, if it could be called that, a fractured slab of alloy, half buried in the ground. He positioned himself beneath it, angling his body to minimize exposure to the storm, not resisting the environment, using it. When the storm passed, he moved again, not randomly, not desperately, purposefully. He watched the horizon before each step, timed his movements between gravity fluctuations, paused when the air density shifted, conserving oxygen, reducing strain. He was not surviving the trial. He was studying it. Hours passed. The numbers dropped, from dozens to half, from half to a fraction. The comms grew quieter. The laughter disappeared, replaced by clipped transmissions, then silence. I began to notice something else. The human was no longer the slowest. Others had burned through their energy reserves, relying on explosive bursts of power that now left them depleted. Their biological advantages, so dominant at the start, became liabilities. The human, however, he maintained a constant pace, slow, measured, relentless. A predator emerged during the later phase, a burrowing construct designed to detect vibration and heat. It struck without warning, erupting from beneath the surface with bladed limbs. It targeted a Corthal first. The creature's strength was immense, but predictable. It fought the predator head-on. It lost. The human encountered the same threat minutes later. I watched closely. He did not fight. He ran. No, moved, erratically, unpredictably.
He reduced his impact against the ground, altering his rhythm in a way that confused the predator's tracking systems. When it struck, it missed. When it adjusted, he changed again. Not stronger, not faster, smarter. The predator retreated. The human continued. By the final phase, the wasteland had claimed nearly all of them. The survivors gathered near the extraction point, a jagged plateau where gravity stabilized just enough to allow retrieval. The Korthal that remained were fewer now, their armor scarred, their movements slower. A handful of Virex lingered at the edges, cautious for the first time. Only a single Sonari unit survived, fractured, diminished. And then, the human arrived. Late, exhausted, alive. He climbed the final incline with visible effort, his limbs trembling, his breathing uneven. Every movement suggested collapse was imminent. But he did not stop. He reached the plateau, stood among them. No one laughed. No one spoke. They looked to him, not with amusement, but with something new. Uncertainty. I reviewed the data one final time. He had not excelled. He had not dominated. He had endured. And in this trial, that was enough. End of evaluation, I announced. Extraction vessels descended, their shadows stretching across the broken survivors. Medical teams prepared for recovery, scanning for critical failures. The human remained standing until the last possible moment. Only when the transport doors opened did his body finally give in, his knees buckling as he collapsed forward, unconscious, but not defeated. As he was carried on board, I found myself replaying the trial again and again. Not the victories of the strong, but the persistence of the weak, because something had shifted. The laughter was gone. In its place, a question. If this was what a human could do when outmatched in every way, what would happen when he wasn't?
The mind is where most wars are lost, not on battlefields of fire and metal, but in the silent collapse of certainty, in the moment when reality fractures and instinct betrays itself. That is why the second trial exists, not to measure strength, but to unmake it. The illusion chambers stood beneath the academy, deep, isolated, shielded from external interference. Even among instructors, they were regarded with quiet caution. We did not enter them lightly, because what they revealed could not be unseen. Phase 2, I announced, my voice echoing through the observation hall. Psychological endurance. You will face yourselves. The cadets did not understand. They never do. They entered with confidence. Those who had survived the wasteland believed themselves unbreakable. Their bodies had endured. Their instincts had proven superior. They assumed their minds would follow. They were wrong. The first to enter was a Virex, fast, precise, lethal. The chamber sealed around it and the simulation began. At first, its movements were controlled, calculated responses to perceived threats. Then came the distortion. The illusions adapted, shifting beyond physical confrontation. Its environment twisted, its sensory input corrupted. It hesitated. That was all it took. Moments later, it began to strike at nothing, its blades cutting. Empty air, reacting to threats only it could perceive. Its precision degraded into chaos. Within minutes, it collapsed. Unresponsive. Removed. Next came a Sonari unit. Their collective mind should have resisted, shared cognition, distributed awareness. But the chamber did not attack the group. It isolated them. One by one, their connection fractured. Each node forced into individuality, into solitude. Panic spread not through emotion, but through dissonance. They could not function as individuals. They never had. They shut down one after another. Failure. The Korthul lasted longer. Their minds were simpler, focused, direct. The illusions fed them endless combat, endless enemies to crush. For a time, they thrived, until the enemies did not stop, until victory became impossible, until exhaustion set in. Even strength has limits. They broke. I recorded each failure without emotion. This was expected. This was the purpose. Then, the human stepped forward. I felt it again. That quiet anomaly. His physical performance had been marginal, his survival unexpected. But here, I anticipated a rapid collapse. Humans, according to every psychological model, are unstable, emotionally volatile, prone to fear, to grief, to irrational response under pressure. The chamber would not need to try. It would simply show him himself. The doors sealed. The simulation began. At first, there was nothing. Then, change. The human's posture shifted, instantly. His breathing spiked. His eyes moved, not scanning the chamber, but focusing inward. The illusion had taken hold. I accessed the feed, restricted data, even for instructors. The contents of each simulation were partially obscured, tailored specifically to the subject's neural patterns. But fragments leaked through, enough to understand. Darkness, then sound. A voice. Familiar to him. Gone. The human froze. Not in confusion, in recognition. The environment formed around him. Structures I did not recognize, smaller in scale, primitive in design. Firelight flickered, shadows moved, and then loss. I will not describe it in full, not because I cannot, but because I should. Not. Even through filtered data, the intensity was uncomfortable. The human was not facing enemies. He was reliving something that had already happened. His body reacted immediately. Heart rate spiking, muscles tensing, breath breaking into uneven patterns. Pain. Emotional, not physical. More. Effective than any weapon, this is where most species fail. They reject the illusion, deny it, fight it, and in doing so, they lose themselves within it. The human did not fight. He fell to one knee, his hands pressed against the ground, his head lowered. For a moment, I believed he had already broken. But then, he spoke. Not loudly, not defiantly, quietly. I know. The chamber adjusted, intensifying the simulation. The scene repeated, altered, deepened. The loss sharpened. The weight increased. The human trembled. But he did not lash out. He did not flee. He stayed. I know, he said again, his voice steadier this time. Recognition. Acceptance. The system flagged an anomaly. The illusion was designed to destabilize through resistance, to create dissonance between perception and belief. But the human was not resisting. He was integrating, processing, adapting. The environment shifted again. Isolation. The figures disappeared. The light faded. The human stood alone in an endless void. No sound. No movement. No reference point. For many species, this is worse than pain. The absence of stimulus erodes cognition. Without input, the mind begins to fracture itself. The human remained still. Seconds passed. Then minutes. His breathing slowed. His posture straightened. He looked into the emptiness, not with fear, but with focus. Not real, he whispered. Logic, grounding, he began to move, not randomly, but with intention, steps measured, controlled. He tested the boundaries of the illusion, mapping it through action. The void responded, distorting, pressing, trying again to destabilize. But now, it was different. The human had identified the pattern. The illusion was no longer absolute. It was a problem. And humans, I realized in that moment, solve problems. The chamber escalated one final time. Everything returned at once. Loss, fear, isolation, overlapping, intensifying, compressing into a single overwhelming experience, enough to break any mind. The human staggered, his control faltered, his breathing became erratic again. For a moment, I thought this was it, the breaking point. He fell to both knees, his body shaking, his head bowed under the weight of everything the chamber forced upon him. And then, he inhaled, slowly, deliberately, painfully. And he did something no other cadet had done. He did not reject the fear. He accepted it. "I'm afraid," he said. The words registered across the monitoring systems, simple, insignificant. But their effect was not. The chamber hesitated, not physically, but algorithmically. Its purpose was to exploit fear, to weaponize it. But fear, acknowledged, is no longer a weakness. It is a known variable. The simulation destabilized. The human pushed himself up, not steady, not unshaken, but standing. The illusions flickered, collapsed, ended. The chamber doors opened. He stepped out. His movements were slower, now. His face, pale, strained. His body carried the weight of what he had endured. But he was conscious, aware, intact. Silence filled the observation hall. No laughter, no commentary, only data and something else. Understanding. The remaining cadets looked at him differently now, not as prey, not as a joke, but as something they could not yet define. I reviewed the results. The human had not achieved the highest stability. He had not been the fastest to adapt, but he had endured longer than most. And more importantly, he had done it differently, not through suppression, not through dominance, but through acceptance, a dangerous trait, because a being that understands its own fear is far more difficult to control. As the human moved past the others, returning to the barracks without a word, I felt that unfamiliar sensation again, stronger now, more defined, not unease, not curiosity, something closer to realization. We had tested his body. We had tested his mind, and both had failed to break him, which left only one question remaining. What would happen when we forced him to fight? Not the truth species believe about themselves, but the truth they cannot hide when survival depends on it. That is why we end with combat. Phase 3, I announced. Team-based tactical simulation. Objective, eliminate opposing units. Victory is defined by survival and dominance. This was the trial they had been waiting for, where strength mattered, where speed mattered, where superiority could finally be proven. The cadets assembled into assigned units, their groupings, calculated for imbalance, forcing cooperation among incompatible species. The humans' team was predictable. 2 Korthul, 1 Virex, a fractured Sonari node, and the human. The reaction was immediate. "This is inefficient," the Virex hissed, its limbs twitching with agitation. "He will reduce operational success." "He will slow us," one of the Korthul added, its voice heavy with disdain. The Sonari did not speak, but their disjointed movements conveyed agreement. The human said nothing. Of course he didn't. He simply observed them, the same way he had observed everything else since arrival. Quiet, measuring, waiting, the simulation initialized. A war-torn environment materialized around them, ruined structures, fractured terrain, limited visibility. Multiple enemy teams scattered across the field. "Advance!" one of the Korthul commanded immediately. No discussion, no strategy. only instinct. They moved as expected, direct, aggressive, overwhelming. The Korthul led the charge, absorbing damage as they pushed forward. The Virex flanked, striking with precision. The Sonari attempted coordination, though their fractured state limited effectiveness. The human followed, slower, behind, watching. The first engagement occurred within minutes. Enemy contact, another team, equally powerful. No hesitation. The Korthul charged. The Virex struck. The Sonari engaged. The human stopped. He did not join them. Instead, he moved to higher ground, positioning himself where he could see the entire battlefield. Analyzing. The engagement lasted 47 seconds. Total annihilation. Not of the enemy, of the human's team. The opposing unit had anticipated the assault. Defensive positions, crossfire zones, coordinated traps. Strength met preparation, strength lost. The human was eliminated last. He had not fired a single shot. The simulation ended. Silence followed. The Korthul were the first to react. Anger, radiating from their posture. "You did nothing," one growled. The Virex added, "Your presence is a liability confirmed." The human looked at them. Finally, he spoke. "Your strategy was predictable." The words were simple, flat, but they carried weight. The Korthul stepped forward, aggression rising. "We are warriors. We do not hide." "And you died," the human replied. Silence. Not submission, not agreement, but interruption. The second simulation began before the conflict could escalate further. Same teams, same conditions, different outcome. This time, the human moved first. "Wait," he said. The command was quiet, but something in his tone, something precise, controlled, caused hesitation. Unintentional authority. "Advance is failure," he continued. "They expect it." The Virex narrowed its sensory nodes. "Then what is your alternative?" The human gestured toward the terrain. "Let them come." The Korthul resisted immediately. "We do not retreat." "It's not retreat," the human said. "It's positioning." A pause. Uncertainty. Then, "Prove it," the Virex said. The human nodded once and began. He repositioned the team, not forward but sideways, into fractured terrain where visibility was limited and movement restricted. He assigned roles, not based on hierarchy, but on function. "Korthul, hold." "Here," he said, indicating a narrow passage. "You're the wall." They did not like it, but they complied. "Virex, movement only. No engagement unless I say." The Virex hesitated, then agreed. "Sonari, watch everything. Feed me patterns." The Sonari adjusted, fragmented but functional. "And you?" one of the Korthul asked. The human picked up a piece of debris, metal, reflective. "I make them think." Confusion followed. Then silence. Minutes passed. No movement, no engagement, tension built, then enemy contact, but not where expected. They approached aggressively, mirroring the same strategy as before, direct, confident, predictable. The human watched them, waited. "Now," he said. The Virex moved, not toward the enemy, but behind them, fast, invisible, disrupting their formation without direct confrontation. The Sonari relayed movement patterns, feeding data in fragmented bursts. The Korthul held position, immovable, forcing the enemy into the narrow passage, and the human, he triggered the trap. The reflective debris redirected a burst of energy. Fire, blinding the enemy's forward units. Confusion spread instantly. Their coordination faltered. That was all it took. "Go," the human said. The Korthul advanced, not into open combat, but into disoriented targets. The Virex struck from behind, precise, surgical. The scenario adapted, faster now, guided by the unfolding chaos. The enemy collapsed, not from strength, from confusion, from misdirection, from control. The engagement ended in 32 seconds. Victory. Clean, efficient, impossible. Silence filled the simulation space. Not the silence of failure, but of realization. The team looked at the human, differently now, not as weakness, not as liability, but as something else. Something they had not accounted for. The remaining rounds followed the same pattern. Variation, adaptation, control. The human never fought directly. He didn't need to. He predicted, positioned, manipulated. Enemy teams fell, not because they were weaker, but because they were outthought. And with each victory, I felt it grow. That unfamiliar sensation. Not fear, not yet, but something. Dangerously close. Unease, because the data no longer aligned. The human was not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most resilient, and yet, he was winning, consistently, decisively. I reviewed his tactical patterns in real time. They were not standard, not even advanced. They were different, unconventional, unpredictable, human. By the end of the simulation cycle, his team stood among the highest-ranked units. The Korthal no longer questioned him. The Virex no longer dismissed him. Even the Scenari adapted to him, aligning their fragmented cognition around his decisions. He had not just survived, he had led. Without dominance, without force, only understanding. As the simulation ended and the environment dissolved, the humans stood at the center of it all, still quiet, still composed, as if none of it had mattered. But it had. Because for the first time since his arrival, I no longer saw him as weak. I saw him as something far more concerning, a variable that could not be predicted, a mind that did not follow the rules we had built our systems upon. And in war. Those are the most dangerous entities of all, because strength can be countered, speed can be matched, even resilience can be broken. But something that thinks differently, something that rewrites the fight itself, cannot be easily stopped. As the cadets exited the simulation, I recorded one final observation. The human was not becoming stronger. He was becoming something else, and I began to understand with growing certainty we were not training him to fight. We were giving him a battlefield to master. The final lesson of war is scale, not the scale of weapons, not the scale of destruction, but the scale of consequence. Up until this point, the cadets had fought in controlled environments, contained variables, limited engagements, predictable outcomes. Even their failures had boundaries. The final war game removes those boundaries. Phase 4, I announced, though this time, even my voice carried a different weight. Full-scale conflict simulation. Factions will be assigned. Resources are limited. Command structures are yours to define. A pause. Then the final line. Victory requires total dominance. The battlefield unfolded across an entire planetary surface, continents fractured by ancient impacts, dense urban ruins, toxic seas, and resource nodes scattered across hostile terrain. Thousands of variables, endless possibilities, chaos. The cadets were divided. Major factions formed quickly, alliances built on strength and familiarity. The Korthal dominated one front, their numbers and durability forming an impenetrable force. The Virex controlled mobility, striking fast, securing key points before others could respond. The remaining Scenari units formed a distributed network. Optimizing efficiency across multiple zones, power concentrated itself, as it always does. And then, there was the human. His assignment appeared on the tactical display. Command. Unit designation 7 Delta. Composition, minimal. Resources below operational threshold, expendable, a testing variable. Even among instructors, there was little interest in his placement. This phase was designed to highlight the strongest commanders, the ones who could dominate at scale. The human was not expected to participate meaningfully. At first, he didn't. The simulation began. The major factions moved immediately. Rapid expansion, resource acquisition, territorial control, engagements broke out across the map, explosive and decisive. Front lines formed. Power clashed against power. And Unit 7 Delta? It disappeared. No expansion, no engagement, no presence. Cowardice, one instructor noted. Survival instinct, another suggested. I said nothing. Because I had learned, by now, to watch the human more closely than the others. Time passed. Hours into the simulation, patterns began to form. The Korthul faction dominated through force, crushing opposition and securing central territories. The Virex controlled the outer zones, striking supply lines with surgical precision. The Scenari adapted continuously, redistributing resources to maintain balance. It was predictable, efficient, structured, and then it began to break. A supply convoy, Korthul, failed to arrive at its destination. No enemy engagement recorded, no environmental interference, just gone. Minutes later, a Virex forward unit reported internal disruption, false signals, conflicting data streams. They turned on each other briefly before regaining control. The Scenari detected anomalies in their network, information loops, recursive errors that slowed their processing efficiency. Small disruptions, insignificant on their own, but they multiplied, spread, connected. I focused on Unit 7 Delta. Still no direct engagements. Still no territorial expansion. But now, movement. Subtle, precise. The human was not attacking. He was interfering. A supply route rerouted slightly, just enough to intersect with hostile territory. A signal mimicked, just enough to mislead. A unit into repositioning. A resource node sabotaged, not destroyed, but destabilized. Each action alone was meaningless. Together, they formed a pattern, not of war, but of manipulation. "He's not engaging," one instructor observed. "He doesn't need to," I replied. Because now, I understood. The human was not playing for territory. He was playing for control. The factions began to collapse, not from external assault, but from internal strain. The Korthul advanced too far. Their supply lines stretched thin and vulnerable. The Virex overextended, chasing targets that were never truly there. The Scenari slowed, their perfect coordination disrupted by constant, subtle interference. Confusion spread, then distrust. Alliances fractured. Accusations formed. "Sabotage," the Korthul transmitted. "Deception," the Virex responded. The Scenari attempted to recalibrate, but their data was no longer reliable, and in the center of it all, the human remained invisible. Until he wasn't. A single engagement appeared. On the map, Unit 7 Delta, position critical, target weakened Korthul stronghold. The assault was minimal. No overwhelming force, no direct confrontation, just precision. The Korthul defenses, already compromised by supply shortages and miscommunication, failed to respond effectively. The humans' unit struck exactly where the system was weakest. The stronghold fell. Shockwaves rippled across the battlefield. "Impossible," one instructor said. But it wasn't. It was inevitable, because the human had not attacked the enemy. He had dismantled them first. More strikes followed. Not random, not aggressive, calculated. Each target already weakened. Each victory already prepared. The battlefield shifted. Power redistributed. And slowly, inexorably. Unit 7. Delta grew, not through conquest, but through collapse. The other factions began to notice, too late. He is the source, the Scenari transmitted, their fragmented network finally identifying the pattern. Then eliminate him, the Virex replied. They tried. Multiple factions redirected toward the human's position, fast, coordinated, desperate. For the first time, they treated him as a threat. The human responded, not with defense, but with escalation. He abandoned positions before they could be attacked, redirected enemies into each other, triggered conflicts between factions already on the edge of collapse. The battlefield descended into chaos. Not natural chaos, engineered chaos. I watched the data stream spiral, conflicts overlapping, alliances breaking, units collapsing under. Pressure they could no longer understand. And in that moment, I realized the truth. The human was not participating in the war. He was designing it. Every movement, every failure, every victory, all connected, all intentional. He's not playing the same game, one instructor whispered. No, he wasn't. Because while the others fought for dominance, the human redefined what dominance meant. Not control of territory, not superiority of force, but control of outcome. And once that was achieved, the rest was inevitable. By the time the simulation reached its final phase, only fragments of the original factions remained. And at the center of it all, Unit 7 Delta, intact, unchallenged. The human stood at the command interface, his expression unchanged, calm, focused, distant, as if the destruction unfolding across the battlefield was not chaos, but completion. I felt it then, fully, clearly, not unease, not curiosity, not even respect. Something far more dangerous, understanding. We had measured strength. We had tested endurance. We had broken minds. And still, we had failed to see it. The human was never the weakest. He was simply the only one who understood. That war is not won by fighting harder. It is won by ensuring the enemy has already lost, before the battle even begins. As the final systems calculated end-state projections, one outcome became unavoidable. The human would win, not by overpowering the others, but by removing every path they had to victory. And as I watched the simulation continue to unravel under his design, one thought echoed through my mind. If this is how a human fights within our system, what would happen if he were ever unleashed beyond it? The battlefield has a rhythm, a pulse. I had always thought it predictable. Force meets force. Numbers dominate. Victory is linear. Until now, the human disrupted that rhythm. As the final war game neared its conclusion, the remaining factions recognized the truth too late. The human was no longer merely surviving. He was controlling the flow of battle itself. The Korthul, Virex, and Scenari, each battered and diminished, abandoned caution and formed a temporary alliance. Their combined might, unprecedented in scale, was focused entirely on Unit 7 Delta. They moved with efficiency, precision, determination. The human's unit was small, underpowered, doomed. Observers, including myself, recorded the outcome as inevitable. Failure was written in the data, yet the human did not flinch. He did not retreat. He observed. He calculated. And then he acted. First, terrain manipulation. Explosions, debris, and destabilized structures redirected enemy movement. Pathways closed. Bridges collapsed. Choke points formed where none had existed before. The battlefield itself became a weapon under his control. Second, positional sacrifice. He abandoned units to lure enemies into traps, creating false zones of vulnerability. Every retreat was a lure, every weakness an illusion. Third, psychological warfare. Subtle miscommunications triggered mistrust among the Allied factions, commands, contradicted observations. Suspicion spread like wildfire. The Korthal accused the Virex of sabotaging supplies. The Sinari misinterpreted Varex's movement as betrayal. Chaos became their weapon against themselves, engineered by a human they had underestimated. And then the crescendo, a coordinated collapse. Fractured units clashed unintentionally. Crossfire erupted, supply lines disintegrated. Leaders were trapped within their own strategy, blinded by their obsession with eliminating him. Through it all, the human remained mobile, adaptive, and invisible when necessary, striking only when advantage was absolute. His team, once expendable, became extensions of his vision, moving with precision, born of his singular understanding. By the time the dust settled, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Smoke choked the air, ruins marked every front. The victorious faction emerged not because they were stronger, but because they had survived the chaos the human orchestrated. Unit 7 Delta stood alone at the epicenter, exhausted, wounded, but victorious. I recorded the outcome. My data metrics failed to capture it. There was no algorithm capable of predicting this. And then I realized what I felt was not fear, not awe, not confusion. It was respect. The human had not only survived overwhelming opposition, he had reshaped the battlefield itself. And in doing so, he had reshaped my understanding of what a species could do. For the first time, I understood strength is not always physical. Leadership is not always by rank. And the most dangerous entity is not the fastest, nor the strongest, nor the most resilient. It is the one who can see the battle before it begins and bend it to their will. And the human had done exactly that. The chamber was silent, not the hollow quiet of obedience, not the nervous hush of anticipation. This was heavier, charged with understanding, tinged with disbelief that had finally transformed into acceptance. Surviving cadets from dozens of species gathered, their armor dented, their exoskeletons scarred, their minds sharpened by trial, but none unshaken. The arrogance that had marked the first day was gone. Mockery, once casual and biting, had vanished entirely. Every gaze was fixed on the front of the chamber where the final ranking board awaited. I stood among them, observing, recording, processing. The simulations, the endurance trials, the psychological chambers, and the war games had all concluded. Data had been compiled, evaluations finalized. And yet, despite all metrics, there was a human element here, one that no calculation could predict. The announcement began. Voice artificial, measured, neutral. Cadet rankings for the Galactic War Academy, Class Cycle 1121. The cadet stiffened. Each name called invoked a quiet nod or a subtle acknowledgement. Standard, predictable, expected, until the final entry. Rank 1, Human Cadet, designation H47. Silence, not disbelief, not argument, not protest, just comprehension. The human stepped forward. No flourish, no grand gesture. His expression calm, unshaken, almost ordinary. And yet, in that calm, there was power. Silent, undeniable power. The other cadets studied him. The strongest species, those who had once towered over him in arrogance, now stood still. Eyes widened, postures relaxed. The laughter, the derision. They understood it had been misplaced. I reflected on the journey, the skeletal frame that could not bear a simple pack, the lungs that faltered under toxic air, the species that dismissed him, expecting weakness, the trials that should have crushed him, yet did not. Humans are not the strongest, not in brute force, not in speed, not in natural advantage, but they endure, they adapt, they overcome, and when necessary, they win. I recorded this final observation with meticulous precision. Yet, no data could convey the quiet terror, the grudging respect, or the awe-inspiring revelation that humans embodied something the galaxy had not predicted. The weak had become the unbreakable. The fragile had rewritten the rules, and the human had graduated first. A shift had occurred, not just in rank, but in perception. And for the first time, I understood the truth my species had ignored for too long. Humans are not to be underestimated, because their victory is not given by power. It is earned through endurance, ingenuity, and will. And when humans choose to win, they do. Always. The chamber emptied. Shadows stretched across the polished floors, lit only by the dim glow of the observation panels. Silence lingered, thick and reflective. The surviving cadets filed out, their armor battered, their pride tempered by what they had witnessed. The human cadet walked among them, unremarkable in stature, yet heavier in presence than any of the titans around him. No celebration, no triumphal gestures. He carried nothing but purpose. Every step measured, deliberate, focused. It was as though the weight of victory mattered less than the path forward. And yet, every gaze followed him, some in awe, some in disbelief, most in quiet, grudging respect. I observed, documented, analyzed. The data streams were complete, the metrics compiled. Every performance indicator, every survival probability, every tactical decision recorded for posterity. And still, the human defied categorization. There were no formulas capable of predicting his outcomes, no model that could fully account for his adaptability, his foresight, or his resilience. Reports would be sent across the galaxy, warnings, analyses, recommendations. Every species that had once dismissed humanity as minor, fragile, insignificant would now reconsider, and, perhaps in some systems, tremble quietly at the implications. But the human would not linger for accolades. He departed quietly, leaving behind the battlefield, the academy, and the eyes of the galaxy. His victory was not for display. It was lived, internalized, complete. I, the observer, the instructor, the alien who had mocked, doubted, and analyzed, remained. And I realized something profound. Humans are not to be underestimated, not because of what they are, but because of what they become when pushed beyond limits. When crushed by adversity, tested against impossible odds, and forced into survival, they evolve, they adapt, they endure, they transcend expectation. And in that moment, the final truth became undeniable. Strength, speed, resilience, they are transient, measurable, predictable. But the human spirit, the human mind, is neither. It is variable, unbound, infinite in its capacity to find a path when no path exists. I transmitted the final report to the Galactic Council. The metrics, the analysis, the simulations, all meticulously recorded. Yet the most important note could not be quantified. Observation, experience, understanding. It was a warning, quiet, clear, unavoidable. They laughed at the human until he learned how to fight like a galaxy. I recorded those words, not as commentary, but as testament, as legacy, as truth. And somewhere in the void beyond the academy, I sensed that this was only the beginning. Humanity had arrived, not as conquerors, but as something far more dangerous, as the species that no algorithm, no prediction, and no arrogance could ever fully contain, and the stars would remember.